Ryan Day and I have something in common. We've both had Ohio State's game against Oregon Circle for a long time.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Buckeye fans, to a Tuesday edition of Locked On Buckeyes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Here on Tuesday, October 8th in the year 2024. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Every offseason, we all look at the college football calendar and say, we got to circle that date, we got to circle that date, we got to circle that date. And then you find just one date in general where it's not just one big game being played, but there are multiple big games being played. You got LSU at a night game. You got Red River on Saturday, and you also got Ohio State going across the country to play Oregon. And with that game being circled for a while, you want to see in the preseason, what do you have right now that you might be able to work with in the middle of the season? You might be able to develop in the middle of the season into being something great. Well, we have seen a lot of great things from Ohio State already. So with that game being circled in the preseason, you would expect Ohio State right now on a Tuesday to be ready to battle with Oregon on a Saturday, and I believe they are. I believe Ohio State, even though they have not had to play a full four-quarter game, I believe they're ready to play a full four-quarter game, or maybe they do what they've done of the first five opponents. They just wipe you out so quickly, then in the fourth quarter, the backups come in. Because that's just what Ohio State's done so far this year. And I'm not saying that's going to be the same case on Saturday. Oregon's really, really good. And those of you that follow me on Twitter at JSteven07, you would have seen a stat comparison that I put out there comparing offensive stats and defensive stats of the Buckeyes and the Ducks, and they're neck and neck. Now, granted, Ohio State, I believe, beats Oregon in every statistical category there on that graphic. And these are all major stats. So it's not like the advanced analytics that is so deep into the weeds you don't understand the terminology that is there. No, it's not that. These are all basic or normal stats that Ohio State just beats Oregon in. But then when you add in the jet lag that the players might be dealing with, then you add in the second road game of the year, there are a lot of factors that could roll into Ohio State laying an egg, not playing their best ball. Oregon forcing Will Howard to beat him with his arm, and he may not be able to do that, or maybe he is. I said in the preseason, I believe that Will Howard is ready for a big test against Oregon, is ready for a big test against Penn State. That was a conversation I had in the preseason, and I believe he is ready. And for the offense right now on a Tuesday, they're looking at number 18. Number 18 is a guy that's done a lot of great things this year at Ohio State, scored 5 touchdowns on Saturday, which almost gets overlooked. We marvel at Jeremiah Smith's one-handed touchdown catch. We marvel at Emeka Buka setting a career record for most receiving touchdowns in a game, joining a very exclusive group of players that have played at Ohio State to score that many receiving touchdowns in a game. But a lot of people are just like, oh, Will Howard, 4 touchdowns, 1 rushing, 5 total. That's not getting all the attention that it deserves. And I'm going to be honest with you. Myself, I was one that got caught up in, he threw the interception, and he did this. And then when I step back a little bit on a Monday preparing for this show, and I said, Will Howard's performance was way better than I think we're giving him credit for. And with that performance on Saturday, and when you know going into the year that Will Howard is a guy that people were wondering, not only will his deep ball accuracy get better, and does he have the arm strength to push the ball down the field vertically, but also his accuracy, because for his career at Kansas State, homie wasn't that accurate. Roughly a 60% passer. That ain't great. That ain't great at all. If you remember school and you were any grade, high school, middle school, maybe you went to college, 60% is failing. That ain't good, y'all. We don't want a failing quarterback in Columbus. Myself, you, I probably don't know you, but I can just guess you're an Ohio State fan. You don't want no failing quarterback in Columbus. You don't want a guy out there that's a 60 or 62% passer. No. Well, Will Howard over the weekend was 21 to 25. I don't need to do the math to tell you that's a passing completion percentage because homie was locked in and dialed in. Yeah, he threw an interception, threw another pass that was almost picked. That's going to happen when you're playing. That may happen when you're playing really good defenses. Think back to the guys in the NFL or the great quarterbacks in college. They have all made questionable decisions because they're human and ain't nobody perfect. And you know the good thing about Will Howard? He ain't got to be perfect on Saturday. He doesn't have to be because of the talent around him. I think Will Howard is the guy that not only had this circled on his calendar in the preseason, but also is going to rise to the occasion. And I think back to the Big 12 championship game that he won, beat TCU. TCU went on to be the national runner-up that year, where Will Howard made big plays with his legs to move the ball down the field. I believe there were some late game touchdowns that he ran in because, hey, he had to make a play, and he did it with his legs. That might have to happen this weekend because Oregon is better than Michigan State. Oregon's defense is not – I don't know if it's better than Iowa's because Iowa's a really good defense that Ohio State, if they did not have some unfinished drives in the first half, if you're looking at an Ohio State team where you're simply saying they just controlled and they dominated Iowa from start to finish. I mean, those were Ohio State errors. Those were not Iowa wins. There were Iowa wins, excuse me. But those weren't like – a lot of those are just self-inflicted. Jay Higgins forcing a fumble on Jeremiah Smith, that may happen. I mean, Jay Higgins is one of the best backers in the country, so that may happen. But if Ohio State just finished drives, we're literally having a different conversation right now about that game against Iowa, and we're more confident going into the game against Oregon. What Will Howard has showed us so far this year is that he has been good enough. He has gotten better every single week. And he has the goods to go on the road to beat Oregon. I believe that wholeheartedly. I've been thinking that for a while. And the more I see him playing the Scarlet and Gray, I believe it even more. Will Howard has what it takes to lead Ohio State to Eugene, Oregon, and to get a win in Autzen Stadium. It's not because he has to do a lot of things with his arm or he has to be a hero. He just simply has to do his job, manage the offense, lead that thing right down the field, get the ball to the playmakers, get the ball to them in space. Maybe it's a bunch of short passes, and those fast guys on the outside, when they're in space, they're probably going to run past a defender that's right by them. Jeremiah Smith has done it. Emeka Buka's done it. Carnell Tate's done it. All these fast guys are quickly running past the defenders because they're just that good. And part of the reason they're just that good is because number 18 is helping them get better every single week. So, yes, Will Howard is a newcomer to Columbus. That don't mean nothing to me. Will Howard has showed me, and he's probably showed you, he's not only gotten better every single week, but you can believe in him to lead the Buckeyes to a victory, not only at home, but also on the road. And on the road, he's going to get a little animated. He's going to get a little excited. He's going to talk back to the fans, which is what you want from Ohio State's quarterback. Don't be shy. None of that. No. Talk back every now and then. It's okay. It's all right. The fans are going to be A-okay as you are talking back to them, chirping a little bit after you take another trip to the end zone. Because I think this might be one of those games where Will Howard scores 2 rushing touchdowns because he has to. Not because it's just a part of the playbook. No. He has to. He has to make a play. He decides to make it with his legs, and it goes back to the offseason. He circled this game, and he said, hey, whatever it takes, and he's ready to do whatever it takes to lead Ohio State to victory. You know who else is ready to do whatever it takes to lead the people in their room? Carlos Lachlan, because I believe he's going to play a big impact on Ohio State's trip to Oregon this weekend because the backs have played really good so far, and I think they'll both have monster games on Saturday night. This episode is brought to you by Roy. All right, Buckeye fans, it's time for the Roy Player of the Week. The Roy app lets you directly support your favorite athletes. Unlike collectives, where you make a donation to a general fund, Roy lets you choose a specific athlete you want to support. You back the players you care about, and in return, get exclusive content after the season, like personal videos and updates. And the best part, It's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't create the content, you get your money back. This week, I'm choosing Emeka Buka for his 3-touchdown performance against Iowa. I just contributed $100 to his campaign on Roy and want you to join me by making a payment of as little as $10. When enough of us contribute, it's not just about the dollars, it's about the message we send to Emeka Buka together. Our collective support helps keep him connected to our school. Plus, Roy is doing their part to bring fans closer to their schools and athletes with an exciting giveaway. Roy is giving one lucky fan 2 tickets to any game of their choice in November. Here's how you enter. Just download Roy in the App Store or Google Play. Use code LOCKEDON when signing up, and you're entered. Already on Roy? Make a payment to any athlete's campaign, and you'll also be automatically entered. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Go to joinroy.com for official rules. Download Roy and try it out. There's no subscription, no recurring fees, and for as little as $10, you can get in the NIL game. Roy, support the players, change the game. This episode is brought to you by Billiards Plus. Billiards Plus has the best selection of pool tables, game tables, shuffleboard tables, and more. And the best service in Central Ohio. Everything you need for in-home and even backyard entertainment is at Billiards Plus. They are family-owned and operated, and when you talk to the staff at Billiards Plus, you know you're talking to an expert that won't steer you wrong. No matter the season, Billiards Plus has all of you covered for all your indoor and outdoor entertainment needs. Kenny, Sarah, and the whole staff will always go above and beyond to give you the best customer service in the industry. Billiards Plus. Visit their showroom on Dublin Center Drive in Dublin. Thank you for making Locked On Buckeyes your first listen every day. When Ohio State hired Carlos Lachlan in the offseason, a lot of us were trying to read up on him, look through his history, and try to figure out how he got to Ohio State. We saw the Oregon tag, and that was all we needed. The past couple of years, he was at Oregon, and you're saying, oh, you're sold. You go back and look at Oregon's run game over the past couple of years, and that was it. That's all you needed to know because Carlos Lachlan got the job done over there in Eugene, Oregon. He had an unconventional path, which was perfect because it just showed not only his work ethic, but you got to see the grind. You got to see how he got it done everywhere he went. Even some of the G5 schools he was at, he was getting guys drafted at schools in places where guys didn't really get drafted. And Carlos Lachlan right now, he might be somewhat of an X factor. I don't normally say coaches are X factors. That's normally a tag we hand over to players. But right now, when I look at Carlos Lachlan, he's pretty much an X factor. Because when you look at Oregon's run game and compare it to Ohio State's run game, there's a difference between Oregon's top 2 backs and Ohio State's top 2 backs. There's also a difference between overall total yardage and yards per play comparing Ohio State and Oregon. So that, when you look at the numbers, I'm going to dive into those in a second, it just goes further to confirm that Lachlan is going to be an X factor, and he plays a big part in what Ohio State will do with the ground game. When I look at Ohio State right now, the top 2 backs, Judkins is not the starter, but he has the most carries, he has the most yards, he has the most touchdowns. His yards per carry is just a couple ticks under Travion Henderson, Henderson's averaging 8 yards a carry. Judkins is averaging 7.8. So they're basically neck and neck. When you look at Oregon, though, Oregon's top back, Jordan James, has 552 rushing yards, had a phenomenal game against Michigan State. When I went back and started to watch some of the film from that, I'm thinking, oh, Jordan James is getting the job done to the ground. He is a guy that Ohio State must know where he is and pinpoint and say, he can't do that against us. Because if he does that, he gives Oregon a chance to win. But then you look at the second back at Oregon, Noah Whittington. Good guy, good back, 42 carries, 165 yards, only averaging 3.9 yards a pop and only has 1 rushing touchdown. So you look at the overall team rushing numbers, just totals and yards per carry. Oregon's ran for 822 rushing yards and 4.6 yards a pop. Ohio State has ran for 1,111 rushing yards and 6.2 yards a pop. The Buckeyes have scored 16 touchdowns on the ground. while Oregon has scored 9. So that's just a small snapshot comparing what Ohio State has in the run game to what Oregon has in the run game. And then when you turn the film on, you're going to see Ohio State's run game has just been consistently better. Just consistently game after game after game. It's not like the Buckeyes had a massive game against Akron and then fell off against Michigan State and Iowa. No, it was just they have been consistent. Had 203 rushing yards against Iowa a couple days ago when Iowa was only giving up 61 rushing yards a game. But we can get into that game, and Ohio State said, "Oh, we see that. We know what your strength is, and we're going to up you." Oregon on the ground, it kind of gives me a lot of comfort knowing that Ohio State's rush defense is so good, and Oregon really hasn't had consistent success on the ground. Oregon's had 2 games where they've ran for over 200 yards. That was at Oregon State in a rivalry game where the Ducks blew out the Beavers in that one. And then also the week ago against Michigan State, who also has a good rush defense. Then Ohio State has ran for over 200 yards 3 times. 203 against Iowa, 280 against Marshall, and 273 against Western Michigan. I believe if you play those games over again, the Buckeyes would have ran for over 200 yards in all 5 games. That's realistically what could have happened. So what's the difference? Not only Henderson and Judkins, but Locklyn. I firmly believe we would not be getting this version of TreVeyon Henderson in this game, this season, if it weren't for Carlos Lachlan. And Tony Alford and TreVeyon Henderson had a really good relationship. So it's not saying Alford was not a guy that wasn't a good coach. I think Tony Alford is a really good running backs coach. But it's possible Oregon had a better running backs coach who is now in Ohio State right now, and Ohio State's about to roll in there. And I was reminded about this statement really in my mind preparing for this show that Locklyn said, and this interview was circulating around the time Locklyn was hired by Ohio State. He said he don't want no soft batch cookie. And I think that's a great way to describe the way that Judkins and Henderson run. They've heard that. They get to appreciate them every day. And they don't run like they're soft batch cookies. They run like they are 2 guys that are mad at the world, stiff arming, big boy linebackers, running right through people, running through people's chest because they are running harder than any back I have seen play this year. Have you seen a back run harder than Quinshon Judkins? Have you ever seen TreVeyon Henderson run this hard ever in his life consistently in the Scarlet and Gray? I haven't. I mean, many of us have watched every snap that he has played. We have not seen that. Also, not only is Henderson running harder, his vision has gotten a lot better. And you know when you're on the road in a hostile environment in Autzen Stadium, there's going to be a lot of things trying to detour you and pull your attention to the right or to the left, and they're trying to just trip you up. Well, you know what you got to do? Stay in your lane. Do your job. Follow your keys. Do what your coach is telling you to do. Oh, yeah, and don't run like a soft batch cookie. And you know what I don't think they're going to do? Run like a soft batch cookies because we haven't seen it before. They're amped up for this game. Like we talked about earlier, this game has been circled on their calendars for a while. It's been circled on mine. And with all that being said, the running backs may have monster games, both of them. And it wouldn't shock me if this were a game where they went over 100 yards apiece. I don't know if they're going to run that much or if they need to. But if they decide to, I got faith in Henderson. I got faith in Judkins. I also got faith in the offensive line. And Ohio State's offensive line this year has played a whole lot better. We're going to talk about them all week long because they're, especially in the next segment on this show, because they're pivotal to Ohio State having massive success in Autzen Stadium this weekend. They played great against Michigan State, great against Iowa. They've been great all year, and they need another great performance against Oregon, who has a talented defensive front. But I believe Ohio State's front 5, the offensive line, can handle whatever Oregon throws at the Buckeyes. What Ohio State couldn't handle the last time Oregon and Ohio State played, the Buckeyes couldn't handle what the Ducks do at them. The Ohio State lost that game. And I'm pretty sure Ryan remembers the feeling he had after that loss in 2021. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Y'all, sometimes stuff is so good, you got to say it again. And that's exactly what I think about what FanDuel is throwing at people like yourself. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. All the action goes down in two places on the FanDuel Sportsbook app and at FanDuel.com. Thank you for making Locked On Buckeyes your first listen every day. As I sit here and think about the last time Ohio State and Oregon played each other, I am reminded about something that Ohio State couldn't do: set the edge. There was numerous times Zach Harrison and other Buckeye defenders weren't able to set the edge, and they got embarrassed. They were just looking foolish, and we all started to scratch our heads in that game, wondering, oh no, will we see a full season of Buckeyes getting embarrassed on defense? And that's basically what we watched. That defense that year was not good. But then there's something else that decided the game. And Stroud in this game, his numbers really weren't that bad. 35 of 54, 484 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, a QBR of 81.4. That's really not bad. Not bad at all. However, the difference was on the ground. Just like earlier in the show, we talked about how Ohio State is going to really need to have great games from Henderson and Judkins on Saturday. Also, the last time these two teams played, Ohio State wasn't able to stop Oregon on the ground at all. It was quite bad, quite embarrassing, honestly. Oregon in that game in 2021 had 38 carries, 269 yards, 7.1 yards a pop, and 3 touchdowns, while Ohio State had 31 carries, 128 rushing yards, 4.1 yards a pop, and only 1 touchdown. That was a touchdown that was scored by Travion Henderson, who had the second most carries, second most rushing yards in that game too. Remember, that was back when Mayan Williams and Henderson were splitting carries, and those two guys were a great 1-2 punch. But even on that day, they couldn't do enough to get the job done, and Ohio State was trying to play catch up the entire game. CJ Verdell, I remember that guy. Remember watching him play. Remember Anthony Brown. When I'm sitting here thinking, ain't no way this quarterback is playing the game of his life against Ohio State in Ohio Stadium. But he did. He exactly had the game, but the Buckeyes had no answer. Yeah, Travis Dye was good. He scored 1 touchdown for the Ducks that day. But CJ Verdell had 161 rushing yards, 8.1 yards a pop, along with 77 and 2 touchdowns. Ohio State had no answer. As I think about that day, and I went through that on purpose because Ryan Day remembers that day, and Ryan Day wants payback. The way to get payback is to stop the run. It seems self-explanatory, right? Seems pretty easy. The numbers tell us one thing about Oregon. The numbers tell us one thing about Ohio State, but the numbers are only one thing. You better get out there on Saturday and get the job done. I don't care what you do in the previous 5 games. What we care about is what you do on Saturday night in Austin Stadium. And when you only care about that, you better realize we can't say you got this game circled and just lay an egg and just embarrass ourselves. You can't do that. The way to get embarrassed and the way for the talking heads that don't like the Big Ten football, that don't like Northern football, to sit up here and say, oh, well, another Ohio State team that can't get the job done in big games. Ryan Day can't be the top 10 opponent, blah, 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 blah. If Ohio State loses, that will be a narrative. I don't think it's the right narrative. I don't think it's a good narrative for Ohio State. I don't think anybody does. But that will be a narrative. Ohio State can't beat the big team on the road, man. It's the cross-country travel. Only one team in the Big Ten that's made that trip multiple time zones away has ended up winning that game, and that was Indiana beating UCLA, a bad UCLA team, and IU's playing out of their minds right now. Ohio State's favored right now by it's Ohio State minus 3.5 at the current line. The over-under is set at 52.5. If I had to make my score prediction right now, I'm going with the under. It's literally written on my paper right now. I cannot say which way I'm leaning. But for those of y'all keeping track at home, I am closer than I was even a day ago to changing my prediction from the preseason about Ohio State's game against Oregon. The Buckeyes have played really good ball, man. And for Ryan Day to want payback, it's not only going to be Ryan Day keeping his mind right and being ultra aggressive like he was against Georgia in 2021. It's also going to be the guys up front getting the job done. The GIS game is going to be won in the trenches, and it will show up in the stat sheet. But no matter if you're the D-line at Ohio State or the O-line at Ohio State, those guys control the game. How in the world did Ohio State slow down Caleb Johnson as much as they did? They won the battle in the trenches. How has Ohio State been able to have such success on the ground? They've won the battle in the trenches. Oregon, what were they able to do against Michigan State that allowed Jordan James to pop off a little bit? They won the battle in the trenches. And that is going to be the key to this game, winning the battle in the trenches. And if Ohio State wins the battle in the trenches, they're going to win the game. That's an easy formula. If the running backs continue to do what they have been doing, and if the D-line slows down Oregon's rush attack like they've slowed down every other rush attack, game over, Ohio State wins. I think it's that simple. That's the formula. But the difference is we can talk about it. We're going to. Will it happen? I think so. I do think so. I do think Ohio State will win the battle in the trenches, and I think it may take the best game from the O-line and D-line for that to actually happen. And if I'm Ryan Day right now, I got to believe in my guys up front. They've been getting it done consistently all year long. Why should I change it now? Yeah, I know it's the number 3 team in the land. I know it's Austin State, and we know all the things about the pageantry, the traditions, and how wild it's going to be out there. One wise thing Ryan Day is doing, even though the game is on the West Coast, multiple time zones away, the Buckeyes are staying on Eastern Standard Time, leaving on Friday, getting out there to Oregon, but their clocks are going to stay the same because the game is going to be a 7:30 Eastern kick, which is the same time it would kick off if the game was a night game at Ohio State. So you're not asking them to change and say, oh, no. The game's going to kick off at 10 o'clock local, which would be 1 o'clock back home. We got to change the clock when we leave a day earlier. No, you're keeping on the same time zone. Keep this in mind, a little nugget I had in my mind a little bit ago. The last two times Ohio State and Oregon, the last time Ohio State and Oregon played, the time zone difference wasn't the problem. The team that came across country won the game. And there was no big question if they could win the game early. And throughout the game, everybody felt like Oregon was going to win the game. So for all this talk about jet lag and going back and going from the East Coast, Eastern time to Pacific time zone, all that stuff, all that noise, all that back and forth. The last two times these two teams played, the time zone difference wasn't the problem. And actually, it was worse for Oregon because the game was a 9 a.m. local kick for them because the game was kicked off at 12 noon Eastern in Columbus. So they not only had to go across country, they also had to play a game where their body was acting like it was 9 a.m. in the morning. And they beat up Ohio State for 3.5 hours in the shoe. Just straight beat them up. Didn't have an answer. That's why with the time zone stuff, the jet lag, the better team, no, not the better team. The team wins the battle in the trenches. I said it once, I'll say it again. They're going to win. The time zone, yeah, it's a factor. But that don't really dictate what's going to happen on the field. Because if the Ohio State just keeps their mind right and follows the script that Ryan Day has to prepare them for that day, y'all, they're going to be just fine. Thank you for making Locked On Buckeyes your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Craig Sheeman puts the Big Ten first when everyone else overlooks it. Find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. Send every email to jstevens317@gmail.com. Buckeye fans, we're about here on a Tuesday. Get a lot of good stuff coming your week this week, heading into the massive top 3 matchup against Oregon. Make sure you subscribe on the YouTube, subscribe on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your fine podcast so you don't miss a beat.